I'm Laura Tyson, and I am serving as the interim dean here at the Haas School, but really I'm here as part of the new Center for Gender Equity and Leadership to introduce their AmpEquity Speaker Series. What a great name, AmpEquity Speaker Series. Wonderful. And I have the great thrill and honor to have this first speaker, someone I met this summer. I met because I'm a little involved with the Berkeley Book Fair, and I was asked by the organizer of the Berkeley Book Fair if I would read a book interview, and I realized at that event how wonderful it would be to have Magdalena with us to kick off this AmpEquity Speaker Series. So here we are, and we're going to do this as a kind of conversation. I know from doing this with her before that she has amazingly candid and entertaining and insightful answers. So let me just tell you a little bit about her, because the story is completely fascinating, and it is a story which also has lessons in it for those of you who are thinking about careers in the technology space. I start with the observation that Magdalena is a very intelligent woman. She is a very visionary woman. She is confident. She is bold. She left Turkey when she was a young girl, 2 suitcases, $43. Nobody in her family had gone to college. Nobody in her family had immigrated to the US to go to college. She chose the colleges she was going to apply to out of a library book, but she knew that she was interested in technology, so she chose schools that had technology in the title. I mean, you know, right, I know I'm technology. I need to find a technology school. She ended up starting at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and she realized that wasn't the right fit for her. So she applied and got into both Stanford and Berkeley. Sadly, she chose to go to Stanford. I've never asked her why.
It's a very simple answer.
Okay. She got a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering and management. She got a master's degree in electrical engineering. Now remember, this was at a time when the numbers of women in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, disciplines were even lower than they are now. So clearly, this was someone who knew herself, knew what she wanted to accomplish, and boldly went through accomplishing that. Once she finished her degrees, that was an entree, a network into Silicon Valley, the world of technology. And here, she has played just about every role. She has been an engineer in a semiconductor firm. She has been an engineer in a big computer firm. She has worked on software. She has worked on hardware. She has worked on, really, the internet unfolded while she was designing her career. And she realized that the internet could be something that could be put to use for commercial services. Who knew? She figured it out. People knew. She knew. So then she went on from there to start 3 companies that actually had 3 successful exits in the business internet space. She then went on, and she might have part of her story here, to work with someone whose name was not a household name at the time, Marc Benioff. A small idea. Salesforce was a small idea. How do you do cloud-based computing and business services? They couldn't get enough venture capital support. I think you told the story of sitting on the floor.
Yeah. Hey, we couldn't even get $1 out of venture capitalists.
Not even $1.
Not even $1. Yeah,
Right.
True.
So basically, you get visionary. Okay, she saw that this was going to be the future. She worked with Marc to get it off the ground. She was one of the first investors, probably the first investor, because she couldn't raise any money any other way, and she served as a founding board member. So basically, she's seen from an idea all the way to this world-class, world-renowned, huge company. And now, the other part of this story, which we'll also talk about, is just being an investor herself in over 30 companies. And in that process, she founded Broadway Angels. She was just at a meeting of Broadway Angels today, and maybe she'll tell us a little bit about that. Broadway Angels is an angel investment group, world-class investors and business executives, all of whom are women. All of whom are women. And most of whom have been the only female partner or senior executive in the firm in which they have worked. So this is a group of very successful women who are coming together now in the angel investing space. So I could say much more, but what I'm now just going to say is a little bit about the book, because the words I used when I first read the book to describe it, it's inspirational, it's very pragmatic. Okay, you can literally go there and sort of think about, yeah, I might be able to do that. It's filled with insights, huge amount of candor. Magdalena reveals herself in this book and does it in a way which is very gripping, very real. You understand something about the person. So the candor is really important, and it's just fascinating reading. So I really recommend the book to you, and I hope that I can ask at least some questions, just bring out what I consider to be some of the best parts, but we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Now, did I miss anything in the intro?
No, I'm humbled. I don't know what else to say. No, thank you very much. That's a fantastic introduction, and especially your words about the book. I really, really appreciate it.
Well,
it's very weird writing a book because you actually write by yourself. Mm-hmm. You don't know what the readers will think when they read it. And so to hear those words really warms my heart. Thank you.
Well, we could just start out with why did you write the book? So here you are, you have a new company I think you're working on, right? It's not as if you don't have other things in your life. Broadway Angels is a new company. So you write a book. Why?
So in the past, I've been a pretty private person. And actually, if you search me online, you won't find very much about me. And so the book is not a natural part of who I am. I'm not someone who lives their life in the public eye. Mm-hmm. And yet I was very compelled to write the book because if you remember a couple of years back, 2015, I think it was, or late 14, the Ellen Powell case, mm-hmm. where mm-hmm. there was a lot of press coverage. This is a woman who was claiming that the venture capital was very hostile to women. In fact, technology was very hostile to women. And many of those claims are very well founded. But the problem that I had with the whole coverage was that if I were a 20-plus-year-old young woman reading that coverage, I would be so incredibly discouraged and so mm-hmm. unmotivated to enter anything to do with technology. And it was really that. Mm-hmm. It was young women telling me, like, there's no way we can make it. I mean, I can't ever be a venture capitalist. I can never really be a EVP in a tech company. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Look at all these other women who have made it in the world mm-hmm. of technology. And when I'd say that, people would say, who? Who? They wouldn't have names. So the book isn't so much about me, but also my interviewing mm-hmm. 27 other women and their successes. Because I felt like if mm-hmm. I did nothing else, I had to showcase the successful women. And I had to share the learnings, the good and the bad, the hard times and the good times, the mm-hmm. joys and the pains, mm-hmm. so that young women would, number one, have some role models to look up to, and number two, maybe get some pragmatic, mm-hmm. lessons so that mm-hmm. when they were having a tough time, when they were not getting the promotion they wanted, they could have a reference manual, if you may, and take a look and see, what worked, what didn't work. So that was really my motivation.
That's great. That's very important because I do think what you're saying is really true, that the numbers, the statistics are really bad in Silicon Valley. And, even after Ellen Powell, we've had all of this reporting on the big bro culture. Right. and how it's very unwelcoming, and there really are very small percentages of women in venture capital and private equity as entrepreneurs. So it's factually
it's
correct.
Very correct,
right?
Absolutely.
So then the issue is you want to motivate people to say, despite there are ways, and here are some insights, some lessons, so I think that's great. Let me start with the fact that you actually say at the beginning of your book, which is about winning. How do you win? Power up. But you do start early in the book with the importance of the courage to fail. And so I think that's also an important lesson for people as they try to make it. So I thought maybe you could illustrate some of your failures that have led to success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think what holds people back is oftentimes the fear of failure. Because if we're worried about failing, okay, failing is no fun. Okay, let's just face it. It's pretty horrible. But it doesn't kill you. Okay? You make it out at the other end. And in fact, you come out probably smarter, probably wiser, probably much more, with inner strength. So the bottom line is, it doesn't really matter if you fail. You're going to survive. So take that risk. Take that step forward. Take that, unknown, venture into the unknown. So failure and ultimately leading to something good. So I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't even know the word entrepreneur, and then when I learned it, it was too long and really hard to spell.
It's very hard. I continued to misspell it.
So, So it wasn't a friendly word for me. And I was totally happy having a job, and I didn't have visions of grandeur like a lot of young people do, but I wanted to have a job, and there had been a period of my career where I'd actually stepped away from the industry and had become a management consultant. And when I realized that that wasn't really going to pan out for me because I'm a technologist and technology moves very fast, and I was now really much more on the service side to the industry, and I was feeling like I was left out, I wanted to get back in. And I had been a product manager, I'd been really successful in my prior jobs. I thought, no, piece of cake. I'm going to get a job. Someone's going to hire me. Well, it turns out not so. I could not believe it. I had just given birth to a kid. I had another kid who was 2 years old, and I'm very hardworking. And somehow I came out of interviews, people telling me I was really very well qualified, maybe overqualified, but never giving me a job offer. And it was incredibly frustrating. It wasn't like we had a ton of money. We had a mortgage to pay, life had its realities. So long story short, I realized I wasn't going to get a job, and I had to somehow make a job for myself. I had to create something for myself. And I made myself an expert on something new, because I always thought that if you want to be an expert in something, you want to look at the next wave where people sitting next to you don't know very much about, so that you can be the smartest in the room. So I made myself an expert in this thing that was just really emerging, and that was the internet. And in those days, this is how old I am, in those days, the internet was in the domain of universities and research institutes and the military, the government.
Where it was designed for.
Right. I personally did a user study, I did the whole thing myself, on who is on the internet today. And then the very first internet conference in Washington, D.C., I flew myself there because I'd basically published this report, presented it to them, and they had accepted, and they had given me a time slot to present. So I show up, I present my work, right? And really out of that, I found my co-founder and founded a company that was in the area of internet access. Had I gotten a job, I would have had a great, lifestyle probably, but I would have never launched myself into entrepreneurship, which has been a fantastic experience. Not every day, but a lot of days.
But I just want to underscore how amazing that story is. So you're basically, she sits down and does her own research and writes her own report without any real help in a new field. And that becomes the basis of the next stage in her career. And I just want to emphasize that because it requires a huge amount of vision, a huge amount of confidence. I mean, you have to have confidence.
You have to have chutzpah.
You have to have chutzpah. You have to have chutzpah. And it worked.
But you know, I had nothing to lose. I mean, what horrible thing could have happened to me? Nothing. I mean, I could have gotten booed out of the room. But, you know, frankly, no one else had done a user study. I researched. There was nothing else. So it was, someone had told me, it doesn't matter how much you know. What really matters is how much more you know from the person sitting next to you. So I put that to work.
So this gets me to a couple of wonderful phrases that are in the book. So one is, you describe yourself, some words that you use are audacious, unflappable. I love those words. If somebody said that was about me, I would say, wow, that's pretty cool. But she also said her first boss said to her, you have a delicious FU attitude. And this will be a huge asset in your success. But at the same time, another wonderful word in the book is a word that I will stumble on, ambitiousness. Ambitiousness is a combination of ambition and humility. So I want you to sort of give us examples of how your the combination of your FU attitude and your ambitiousness have played into your career.
Well, I think being an immigrant basically makes you, by definition, humble. I mean, you show up, no one owes you anything. No one really knows you. Whatever anyone gives you or however anyone helps you, you're so grateful. You can't believe they did that for you. So you're humble by definition because you have nothing that you're entitled to, and you know that very well. I think that that was kind of the basis for me. And ambitious because I had to be, because no one was covering for me. The delicious FU attitude, I don't know where that came from, but I'll tell you the story.
That was early on in your career.
But let me tell you how that came about, the story of that.
That's a good one.
So I started my career as a semiconductor design engineer. And in those days, you basically sat by yourself and we didn't even really use computer-aided design, even though I'd used it at my school for my master's program. You basically designed by yourself. And then every so often you would have a design review meeting, and all the engineers would get together, and your boss would be there, and your other engineer bosses would be there, and you would present your design, and then they would give you feedback. And this was my very first engineering review meeting. I was very proud of my work, and I never forget, I bought myself, don't ask me why, I bought myself a pink suit. And I was wearing my pink suit. I thought I was so professional looking. Anyway.
It was a suit, and it was pink. And by the way, I think at the time it was probably entirely appropriate.
It was a cotton suit, I'll never forget, with white piping. It was like, anyway, I was wearing that. I felt incredibly self-confident. I get up, I'm showing my design, and I've got my pages up. And, one after another, they start firing at me, my fellow engineers, finding my mistakes, all my inconsistencies in my logic. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. They're really giving me good feedback. That's what I was thinking. I was not getting upset. I was just like, oh, this is what a design review is. So I walk out after like a 2.5 hour session. And my boss says, come into my office, So I go in, and he says, well, how do you think that went? And I said, I think it went really well. And he's like, were we in the same meeting? He said, it's like they just really tore you apart. They tore your design apart, and they just weren't even kind about it. He said, what was good about that? I said, well, they were doing my debugging for me. They found so many of my mistakes. It was fantastic. All I have to do now is basically fix that stuff. It was very good work. And he just looked at me and he said, Magdalena, I don't know where you get your delicious FU attitude, but it's going to really serve you well. And then that's how my nickname, got to stick with me.
Because there's something very important throughout your whole story of basically a sense of confidence and esteem, so that when you hit a low point, or you hit a failure, or you hit a kind of criticism, you're able to, because you have a sense of your own worth and your own vision, to say, okay, how can I make that work for me? And I think that's really, really very important. I mean, again, it goes back to, imagine you getting on the plane to come to the U.S., being the only person in your family who, you have to have the willingness to take a huge risk and believe in yourself. So I think that it's very consistent.
Thank you.
So now let's get to, you also say it's important to be the boss of your career. So tell me some decisions you made. So we obviously have talked about one already, which was your boss of saying, okay, I'll just create a whole new field for myself and write a white paper, and but you also, for example, had an opportunity to work at Apple for Steve Jobs, and you chose not to do that. So talk a little bit about how you've been your own boss. And
yeah, I mean, the first, just to go back to the Apple stories, I had the opportunity twice. The first time, and if we have time at the end, I'm happy to tell you about it, but I won't go into it now. But the first time, I turned it down, not really knowing what I was doing. The second time, I turned it down, very much knowing what I was doing, because I was making an independent decision for myself. I wasn't making the decision for the community, for the prestige, for my children or my husband or my colleagues. I was making it really for myself, what was right for me. So I think being the boss of your own career, it's actually, you're driving your own career. And sometimes what you choose to do, it might seem incredibly stupid to others, but it might just be right for you. And the other thing is, if you believe that you are really the navigator of your own career, you will not be looking at others to open up doors for you. You will not be looking at others to lift you. You will not be looking for the mentor to, ascend your career. Because frankly, the opportunity for something like that to really happen in a positive way in your career is probably pretty low. So I think that if we take control of our own careers, first of all, we are not going to put our energy looking for others to help us. We're going to put our energy into ourselves. And secondarily, we'll feel much more empowered. And yeah, not everything works out. I mean, I use the water analogy in my book when I open it, and I close it with that. It's what really matters, and I believe, is flowing forward. You don't always get to where you thought you would. Sometimes there's an obstacle and the water has to go around it, and instead of going at this angle, it's flowing at a different angle, but it's flowing forward. So it is the ability to really take control of your career and feel good about it, and also not to really rely on others, because most of the time when we rely on others, we're disappointed.
So let me ask a little bit more about that. So you've talked a certain amount about skepticism about mentors and sponsors, and in your life, I guess it seems to be the case that there haven't been those kinds of relationships have not been important. On the other hand, you have been very, I think, creative about finding ways to network into professional communities. It's not an individual sponsor. It's just like making sure that if you're moving into a space, you kind of know the players in that space and they begin to know you.
Yeah, and I think that, so two things. Number one, I make a distinction between a mentor and a sponsor in the book, and I really do believe that.
Yep.
A sponsor is someone who is like a boss, who actually will benefit from your success.
Right.
A mentor is much more benevolent of a relationship, and what I say is that sponsors are really, if you're going to focus, you're much better off focusing on people who have a symbiotic relationship with you that will win from your wins. Because frankly, if they're, people are only so giving, I mean, at the end of the day, so you want people to feel like they actually have a vested interest in your success and can then benefit from your success. So they have a motivation on their own.
Well, I think that's a very important distinction. I really wanted to bring that out because
And I think the reality is, I did have, about coming back to the networking piece of the question, I did have, my first partner, who was my partner twice in 2 different companies, was a phenomenal partner for me. Was he ever a mentor? Not really. Was he a sponsor? You might say so. He was much older than me. I'm talking about Dan Lynch. Much older than me and much more experienced than me. And when we started our first company, he said, I'm going to take 90% of the equity, you're going to get 10%. I didn't say 10% is too little. I was just honored that he was considering me as a partner. It worked out really well. Maybe if I were, a different person, I would have negotiated more. But the one thing about networking is that I always was good about asking for what I wanted. And I'm going to tell a Cybercash story.
This is good. Yeah.
So we have, this is my second startup, we have a tiny little company, and I'm a nobody. And this guy who is God in the industry, who runs the most exclusive conference I get to meet. And his name is Stewart Alsop. And he runs Agenda. And Agenda is a place where Bill Gates shows up and Larry Ellison shows up, and it's only 500 people. It's very exclusive. And I get to meet Stewart Alsop, and as he is leaving, I say to him, you know what? My birthday's coming up. And he looks at me like, and this wasn't rehearsed. I mean, I'm like making it up on the spot. Like,
it was your birthday, though. You weren't making it.
And by the way, my birthday is coming up again. It's almost September birthday, okay? So I say to the guy, my birthday is coming up. And he takes my bait, and he says, oh, really? And I say, yeah. And you know what I want for my birthday? Now he's probably thinking, what's wrong with this woman? I just met her. He says, what do you want for your birthday? I say, I want to come to the Agenda Conference.
Come to the Agenda
That's what I want for my birthday.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's like, oh, okay. And then he leaves. What is he going to say? And sure enough, I think it was maybe 2 months later or 3 months later, I get not that far out, I get an email from him, and he says, I thought about it. I actually would like to invite you as a speaker. And he puts me on stage with Scott Cook and a couple of other dignitaries out of the finance industry. And my job, I'm representing Little Cybercash, and my job is to talk about how we're going to change the world of financial transactions.
Right.
So, had I not said that to that man, that would have never happened. So I'm very happy I did. Now, the probability of that happening was probably less than 5%. I just hit it. If it hadn't happened, would I have lost sleep? Not at all. I could care less. I just planted the seed and moved on.
So I think this is really an important story. This had a lot of resonance for me because in my life I have oftentimes thought, gee, I would like to be invited to that conference, or I'd like to be invited to write a column. And I have actually said, and I haven't even used my birthday as a ploy, I've just sort of said, I'd really like to come to that conference, and I think I might be able to play a role. And this literally, when I was interviewing you, this had literally recently happened to me, where I had Foreign Affairs is a very influential journal, and I'd written with a woman co-author at McKinsey, and I kept seeing all these co-authored articles by men on the same topic at Foreign Affairs. So I said to my co-author at McKinsey, I said, I'm going to write to Foreign Affairs and say, we have an article. And sure enough, I did, and they said, oh, send it to us. And they said, oh, yeah, we really like it, we'll put it in. If I had not done that, it wouldn't happen. It's sort of like you just have to, right. And again, it wouldn't, if it didn't happen, it wouldn't be tragic. So, right. But I think putting yourself there with some sense that, yeah, I really could add value here. It's really where you think you could add value. And then
exactly.
You have to believe that. And
right.
Then,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I needed that man in my interaction to know that if he invited me, he wouldn't be embarrassed. Right.
You needed to know
so
that.
I would be adding value.
Right.
But the probability of that happening would have been, in my mind, was very low, but, you know, throw it out there.
Throw it out there, right. Very important lesson. We're going to run out of time because I want to get Q&A. So let's do a little bit of Salesforce, just a couple of Salesforce stories because it's important.
Why not?
Why not? Right.
All right, so Salesforce, the tallest building west of the Mississippi, right? It didn't start that way. Let's see, where to begin? I think begin at the very beginning, and that is this whole concept of, you know, my working with Marc. How did I get to know him? Why did I work with him, et cetera? So I actually met Marc Benioff when I was working at Cybercash, the company, the little startup I mentioned, and he was at Oracle. So he was my sponsor at Oracle, and we worked very closely together. Oracle was actually a very good partner for us. And then after I left Oracle, after I left Cybercash, I started another company, and Marc very much was interested in investing in my little company. We, you know, continued our relationship, our friendship, and I sold my third startup very early on. And so there was no company for him to invest because it got acquired. But we continued, and we'd get together every so often. We made, I think, 2 or 3 investments together. One thing that I became, that we didn't mention, was I became a venture capitalist after that company got acquired.
After the third one got acquired?
Yeah, exactly. So I was a VC for 8 years with US Venture Partners. And, you know, Marc was at Oracle, so he'd bounce things off of me. And one day he called me and he said, I want to have lunch with you. And he said, I want to have lunch with you at the Peninsula Club. And I'm like, that's in Burlingame, isn't it? I work on Sand Hill Road and you work on Walston. Why are we going up there? It's too inconvenient. He said, it's very important we go there. I'm like, okay. So we get there, and I'll never forget, Marc orders this, you know, gazpacho kind of soup, cold soup, and he wants lots of onions in it. I'm like, that's a lot of onions. No one's gonna want to sit in a meeting with you this afternoon, including me. And he said, no, this is really important. And I said, what's going on? Because he had never done that before. And anyway, he said that it was very important because this was a club that Tom Siebel often came to for lunch. And this was what Tom Siebel ate. And I'm like, what does Tom have to do with any of this? So he told me that he had this idea that Siebel Systems was way too heavyweight, way too expensive, cost too much to license the software, and then cost, you know, $1 million plus to license, and then another $1 million plus to actually implement, oftentimes maybe 2, and it would drag on. And then at the very end, the functionality that actually enterprise users used was a minuscule percentage of the overall thing. So his idea was that, you know, wouldn't it be great if for a very small fraction of the price, you could deliver 80% of the functionality that people used. Maybe it's only 20% of the functional set of what Siebel Systems offered, but it's what most people use, and offer it in such a way that would require no integration, basically a multi-tenant architecture. And if you guys remember, back in the late 90s, the ASP model was, you know, kind of a conversation piece, even though no one was really being that successful with it. So it was maybe a next generation ASP model. And it really rang very true to me, because I've been looking at, as a venture capitalist, looking at all these new startups, software startups, and I truly believe that enterprise software as we knew it was going to go away. It just had to happen. It was so expensive.
It took so long.
Exactly. And most people couldn't use it. No. And small and medium-sized businesses couldn't use any of it because they couldn't afford it. It was going to change. So when Marc said that to me, and I knew how, you know, I knew what Siebel's revenues were. I knew what their market cap was. I'm like, this is a no-brainer, Marc. If you want to do this, I'm behind you. I'm going to help you do this. And really, at that lunch, I committed to Marc. I committed dollars, and I committed, you know, my cycles, my work. And he said, okay, the most important thing, I said, what can I do for you? I'm going to help you raise money. I'm a VC.
Right.
Okay.
So you can help
At the very least, my firm will invest. I will serve on the board. I'm going to invest. I'm going to get you investors. I failed at that. And then I'm going to help you hire people. And he says, great. You can start this afternoon. I am like, okay, who are we, where are we doing? And he said, we have to hire this group of 3 engineers, and they're kind of on the fence. And anyway, the most important conversation probably in all of our lives was my conversation with Parker Harris, who ended up coming on board with his 2 other cohorts of his 2 buddies as the founding engineering team. And Marc drove to Parker, put him in his car. They called me from the car, and my conversation with Parker goes something like, Parker says, okay, Magdalena, if you're so smart, tell me, what are the barriers to entry of this business? Because I can't see any.
Very smart question.
And I said, there are none. There are no barriers to entry. Anyone can do this. It's a very simple concept. And he's like, so why would I leave what I'm doing and join? I'm like, because it's not the barriers to entry that make a company successful. It's just how fast you run. If you're always outperforming and running faster than any of your competitors, you're going to be the leader. That's how you get the leadership. It's not, we're not doing moats these days. Those days are over.
But you also had, I'm sorry to interrupt, you also had the point that you knew that the customers that were being ill-served by the standard way. So basically, if you got in early and you could really, you have this concept throughout the book of win-win. This was where you were going to win for your customers.
No question about it. And you're absolutely right. There was a big hole there. Yeah. Customers were paying a lot and were not happy.
Really not happy.
And so if you could come and give them value for the little money that they would pay you, and actually give them a great experience, we would penetrate at least a certain percentage of the market. So that's one Salesforce story. The second Salesforce story is we went through a transition. We started out basically with a telesales model where we didn't have salespeople on the street. That was a very important kind of business structure for us, partly because we didn't have the money to hire enterprise salespeople, and secondarily because we felt that this was the new way of selling. We had all these web tools. We could actually do a demo online. And at some point, we decided that we weren't getting the big accounts and that we had to hire real enterprise salespeople. So what happened when we did that was that remember, people, companies, our customers would pay us on a monthly basis, but we would pay the commissions up front when a deal closed with a customer. So we had really bad negative cash flow.
Yeah, you didn't, the cash flow model didn't work.
We're getting basically paid with little trickles every month, but we were out, paying out up front when a deal closed. And our cash flow was very scary. And I brought, the other part of the story is I brought Salesforce to my firm multiple times, and each time my firm passed, as well as other firms, which was very, very, very disappointing to me personally.
They were all wrong, so.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's like in hindsight, but at the time it really hurt. It was very painful. And anyway, so we couldn't raise money. We were just, we were going to be running out of cash. We were at the brink of bankruptcy. And when I brought the company to USVP and USVP passed, I stopped sleeping at nights. It was really hard. So every night after I put the kids down, I'd sit there with a spreadsheet and try to figure out how can we navigate this. And I'm not that good at spreadsheets. I don't have an MBA. So it's like, it's my version of spreadsheet.
I think you're good enough because of the decision you came to.
Yeah, so
thank
you very much for saving me. So the decision was that if we can ask our customers, and what goes back to customers love you, right? Yeah, if we can ask our customers to basically pay us up front instead of on a monthly basis, and give them a discount to motivate them to pay us up front. Not require it, not everyone will do it, but give them some motivation and have contracts. We can actually close that negative cash flow gap. And I went to Marc with that, and Marc's like, are you kidding me? That's so against what we've been preaching. We have been preaching no contracts, no commitment. You know, you can
use
come
it
in,
as you want.
use it as you want. It's like this total freedom. I'm like, yeah, total freedom, but we're going to go out of business. And you know, it's like it's not going to work. So the good news was that it wasn't just me who was thinking this. It was also our head of sales. And he was actually more important than what I was saying because he was close to the customer. And he also was supporting me and saying, our customers, some percentage of them will actually convert. This is a good idea. They're not going to desert us. They're actually going to convert. They will like the idea of getting a discount on a contract. Anyway, long story short, as we did, Marc finally went along with us. We did that, and sure enough, we turned the corner. And a lot of good things happened.
So remember, she did have an undergraduate degree which included the word management.
That's true.
And I do actually think that was, you know, that was a business organization management decision. It wasn't a technical decision.
You're absolutely correct. And actually, you know, I use that whole management approach or efficiency approach or operations research approach to even my cooking in the kitchen. When I'm serious. It's like, you know, how can I be most efficient? What am I doing? Like, are we wasting stuff? And it was that kind of thing. Are we wasting, you know, we're paying up front, we're not actually really taking advantage of our customers' loyalties. They're paying us for, you know, 24 months. Now we've been in customers. We're not taking advantage of that. Can we take that? So it was that management approach, even though I didn't have the formal training.
So I think one of the goals of a business school like Haas is, you know, a lot of our students do come here with the kind of technical training you have, and then they kind of develop these other kinds of skills. So the combination of skills in your life has actually been really important. I mean, you started out technically designing something that was based on your graduate degree, but you've really gone on to really design businesses. It's a different skill. The technical knowledge matters, but it's a different skill.
You're absolutely right.
So I'm going to end up with a controversial question. There are many I could ask, but in order to stimulate some. So in the book, you recognize that there are strong biases against women by both men and women. But you also come out pretty strongly against the use of quotas as a way to deal with the biases. So, and you also do express concern that one's consciousness about bias might actually run the risk of turning those who think there's bias against them into victims. You actually also talk about that. So I wonder if you'll talk a little bit about why you're opposed to quotas and what you think are the healthy ways that companies can deal with biases, which truly do exist.
Absolutely. No question about it. And like you said, you know, biases exist in male and female brains. It's not a gender-specific thing. And we all have to train ourselves to free ourselves of that. And I think that it's fantastic that more and more companies are doing formal training in this area. The one thing I do believe in, even though I don't believe in quotas, the one thing I'm very passionate about is equal pay for equal work. I believe in that. I think it's such a simple concept, and it's amazing that it is so controversial and so hard to achieve. You know, if two people are doing the same work, why should one be getting 80 cents on the dollar? And I also, even though I'm against government and too much regulation, I also truly believe that independent audits for salaries in companies of a certain kind, especially in public, of a certain size, especially in public companies, should really be required. Because that's the only way we're going to get down to that. We're going to actually see the difference. It's very hard to do that in a small company. It's just as, you know, you only have 50 people, you can't really, it's not a statistically significant sample to say, in fact, there is a gender bias here in pay. But when you're looking at 20,000 people, 15,000 people, even 3,000, 2,000 people. Now you're getting to the numbers. So I do believe that just like we have financial audits that are required of publicly traded companies, hopefully, fast forward another decade, we will have audits that are looking at parity in not just in gender pay, but parity across the board. Because if someone's doing the same work, they should get paid the same amount. I truly believe that. Why don't I believe in quotas? Because I do believe that it can actually create negative bias. Let me tell you a very short story. This interview that I did while I was writing the book with a firm. It was a law firm that decided that they wanted to hire a lot of young women for the incoming class, and they did. And I was interviewing senior partners as well as some of the women who were hired in. And it was very sad for me to find out that these young women were not getting accepted onto the fun, great projects by the senior partners because they were considered to have been hired on their gender and not on their skill set. Okay, that's that's not a consequence we want. No. But unfortunately, those things exist. I truly believe in merit. I think that meritocracy is a good thing. I know some people say it's an antiquated concept, but I do believe in meritocracy. I think that the people who should get the jobs are the most deserving, regardless of gender, regardless of race. But I do think what we have to do is open up that funnel up front when we're interviewing for candidates. That's right. We have to have a diverse intake of candidates. Because if we don't, how are we going to get diversity at the end? We never will. Now, I'm not a believer in hiring people specifically for the minority group they represent, but I am a believer in opening up that funnel up front and including a much more diverse group so that it's not just the kids that went to school with you at Dartmouth or Berkeley or Stanford. Right.
Oftentimes when I've thought about this in my own life, I've thought of it as opening the funnel as a kind of affirmative search as opposed to affirmative targets. Affirmative search means you actually do look more broadly.
Absolutely.
And that you will actually, if you look differently, you actually will find different sources of merit that you actually just didn't consider.
And you just wasn't in your natural network.
Right, not in your natural network. Right. No. All right, so I've used up everybody's time, but I'm still going to say that we have some time here. So do we have any questions? Because I have many more, but I'll stop. I'll force myself to stop. Questions? Any? Yes.
So I'm really excited about Broadway Angels, and I wonder if you could talk about your vision for Broadway Angels and how that connects to the last question of equity. Do you look at that in terms of who you fund, and do you use the metrics yourself?
Yeah. So Broadway Angels came about because we felt that there were females in the investing community, in the venture community, but they were very few, and most of us didn't even know that others existed. And it was like, I was a lone wolf here, and so was a lone wolf there, and that we felt that as a community, we really needed to actually elevate ourselves, have a voice, so that we could then do something about venture funds getting motivated to hire, to attract more female investors. Now, Broadway Angels invests in the best companies. We are agnostic to male or female founders. Now, one thing I want to say is that we find more female founders coming to us than male founders, partly because oftentimes if you are creating a business that is 90% female consumer, female customer, most likely your investors are going to relate to that product if they're of the same gender. And I never forget, I was at USVP and we were looking at a female incontinence product. Okay, I'm the only female partner. I didn't even know what incontinence meant. I was pretty young. And after the group left, everyone, I'm not a medical device person. Everyone looked at me, turned around, all my partners, and said, Magdalena, what do you think? RFID, RF controlled, controller to open up basically your muscle to release urine. And I'm like, why are you guys looking at me? I don't have the problem. but it's that kind of mindset. If it's female incontinence, she's the only female, let's ask her. So having a collection of female investors actually, I think, encourages female entrepreneurs to be hopefully much more aggressive in their fundraising. We do have a disproportionate number of female entrepreneurs that are in our portfolio, but like I said, we want to invest in the best companies. We do not want to invest for charity or for social change, only by choosing a certain subsegment of the entrepreneurial group. The good news is that we have great track record. Actually, I think that Harvard Business School is doing a case study on us.
Fantastic.
And that's, some of the numbers will be published. My most lovely story about Broadway Angels is that I had a New York reporter talking to me about Broadway Angels, and I said, yeah, these are, all women investors, and they write, and he said, what size check they write? And I said, well, anywhere from, $25,000 to multiple millions of dollars, and our investment size varies widely. He's like, women writing checks for millions of dollars? I said, yeah. And he's like, who are these women? He said, are they wives of CEOs? And I said, wives of CEOs? These are the women who hire and fire CEOs.
That's a great answer.
Anyway.
That's good.
So we're teaching the world a few things.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Joanna. Thanks so much for coming. I really like what you said about becoming an expert in something that not a lot of people know about.
That's very smart.
I was just wondering if there are any sub-segments of tech that are really exciting to you right now.
Where shall we go?
Well, you have to combine your interest and passion with an area that's emerging. I chose one. I'm doing a company right now, and it is a very I like unsexy stuff. I don't like sexy stuff, because by the time they get sexy, it's like too many people are looking at it, and the valuations go up, and entrepreneurs become larger than God, and you can't deal with them. So my attitude is to find kind of the sleeper stuff. And the space that I'm working in right now is basically using software, using technology to automate auto financing from a consumer point of view. So auto financing has a lot of documents, especially for the subprime borrower, where the borrower has to present to the lender. And today it's mostly done at the dealership. Right. And most consumers have horrible experiences at the dealership and are kept for 4 or 5 hours and would rather be at getting their root canal done than sit at the dealership. So it's a piece of, we've created the software experience for the consumer to upload their documents in a very private way, where the dealership is not actually seeing their private, personally identifiable information. The lender gets it directly. The dealer is kept abreast as to what's going on. But then the lender doesn't have to, have huge farms of people looking at these documents. We actually use machine learning to analyze and take these unstructured documents, which are basically pictures or PDF files, and then extract information, extract data by doing the machine learning thing, saying, oh, this looks like a name, this looks like a birthday, this looks like a date, this is in this place, so it must be a birth date, but it doesn't match with a credit application, flag that. So it's automation of that process. So I really like very boring areas that no technologists are really focused on, and then go study that and see how can I actually use technology to bring automation, efficiency, while improving the consumer experience.
So consumers and efficiency are part of your...
Those are two good things.
Those are two the things that stay with you. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Magdalena, I love in your book, you talk about yourself, like you have this core self-esteem. And I am curious about, in your role at Broadway Angels and in working with other women leaders and women founders, what you do when you're working with women who you're mentoring or sponsoring who don't have an innate core and who run into this fear and they aren't able to let it roll off of them the way that you are.
Yeah.
How do you support them in
Yeah.
those moments? What do you say to
Yeah,
them?
no, it's very hard. I mean, I actually spent literally 2 hours last night on a phone call on this very topic with someone I care a lot about. I only have sons, I don't have daughters. But, you know, I truly cherish, I love young women who are, you know, all full of energy and when they want to do things and yet they get hit and they're on the ground and they can't get themselves up because they're just devastated. So how do you mentor someone to or sponsor them? I'm not sponsors to these people; they don't work for me. But you know, how do you teach someone that ability? And the only way you teach someone that ability is to basically tell them that no one else matters but them. The only opinion in the world that really matters is your own, of yourself. And you know what? You can always find another job. And nothing is, I mean, there's this one woman, she got a great, in her mind, great job in a venture capital firm. Okay, these jobs are plum jobs for most people. Right. They're hard to get. But her situation was incredibly abusive. And she wouldn't get herself out of it. I'm like, why not? She's like, this is the best job in the world. I say, to whom? Not to you. It's a horrible job to you. It's like, why can't you see that? So it's this, I got this amazing job. It's like people who are in abusive relationships in their marriages. It's like, I have to hold on to my spouse. Why? You know, that person is abusive of you. Your life is hell. So trying to show them that, in fact, what someone else thinks about them doesn't really matter. And there are plenty of other fish in the ocean.
The water analogy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my name is Susan Weber, and when Salesforce was starting, I was in Marin County, and a vice president of engineering at a startup. Market tool Zoomerang was a product. It was the first online survey product. I had young kids, and one of them had a health problem. I didn't want to commute to the city, and that's where everything was happening. But one thing in your book that I thought was really important that I really didn't have the opportunity to do because there weren't that many female is find other females if you're in a male-dominated company and band together and support each other. And a lot of times when I was early on in my career, or even later in the career, the women weren't supportive of each other.
Very true.
And it's,
Yeah.
it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Find the people that are interested in working with you, that have the same problems you are, and you'll get so much stronger and better and successful by doing that.
Yeah, I want to say 2 things to that. First of all, your observation is very correct. I think that when I was starting out in my career, women were very unwelcoming of other women. The queen bee syndrome, you know, I'm the queen bee here and I don't allow any other females. I'm very happy to say that I think that has changed significantly.
Yeah, I do too.
And Broadway
Yes.
Angels is a good example of that. I think that women do. All Rise is another movement that is very female, supporting other females. So I do think that females have figured out that actually that's really destructive for us. The second thing I was going to say is in environments where you might not have another female, or you might have another female who doesn't want to have much to do with you, it's really important to find male colleagues, male allies, and sometimes, in fact, they're better in the sense that they will bring you information that maybe as females you wouldn't have access to. And same thing, by the way, for men. I think it's really good to have allies at work of the other gender because, let's face it, we don't look at the world exactly the same way, and we benefit from each other's points of view. So I think cross-gender support is really key, and we need to search those out. Thank you for that.
Okay, I think we'll do 2 more and then we got to stop. We're over time already. Here and then there. Yeah.
Hi there, Nisha Gar, first year MBA. Curious to hear how you think about your portfolio mix at Broadway Angels, just given the breadth of companies that you all are investing in, from personal coaching all the way to blockchain. How do you think about your expertise and portfolio overall?
Yeah, in some ways it's very easy for us because we're not a fund. So we do not have a fund that we invest out of, so we don't have a portfolio of the fund. Each individual who makes the investment makes it for themselves. That's the whole concept of an angel collection. And so my portfolio looks very different than someone else in the group. I will invest in, actually, I maybe have 6 or 7 investments that overlap with others, but then others might choose not to invest in the stuff that I like, and vice versa. So it's very, because everyone's writing their own check, it's very independent, but you need to have another Broadway Angel to bring a company in front of Broadway Angels. And ultimately, you cannot bring Broadway companies to Broadway Angels unless you're very serious about investing yourself.
I see. So that's how it works. So basically, a member of Broadway Angels brings in an idea that they know that they're seriously going to consider. And you need another one at the same time.
Right. Because we don't want people just using it as, let me just throw it out the wall and see if it sticks.
Is that a pretty standard sort of format for angel investing?
Partnerships do the same thing. You know, you need to usually get a second partner before you can bring a company to the whole partnership.
Okay. And there was a question over here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ellen, and I'm like a year 1 MBA student, and also I'm a new mom. I have like a newborn boy, so 1.5 months old.
Congratulations.
I wonder, can you share a little bit of how do you balance family,
that's a good
career, and personal interests, personal goals?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot. I got it last night. I spoke at an event in San Francisco. My answer is I have not figured it out. Okay? I actually don't think there is such a thing as balance when you're a mom and a career or a school. I mean, I did it. I enjoyed it. But I did it by sacrificing my sleep. Basically, I always stole from my sleep. I would go home in the evenings. I always got out of there first thing in the morning before anyone else woke up. That was my key. I got out of my house by 5:15 because I knew that if I were stuck in the house when the kids got up, I would be there for hours and I'd be looking for homework or baseball bats or whatever. So I got out. My husband had morning duty, I had evening duty. So my husband and I very seldomly saw each other, but that's another story. We're still married. But, you know, I mean, we basically divided and conquered. I mean, we used to say things like, well, you can't go on that business trip. I'm gone that week. So, you know, you can't go on that dinner, out to that dinner. I'm gone that night. So we had a calendar where who was going to be gone. We tried to have a parent at home. But my secret to my career, the person who made my success possible is my mother. My mother lived with us until the kids were, I think, 8 or 7 and 10 and 9. She was a mother at home. Now, she had never had boys, so it was really tough on her. She thought every day she thought one would die. And it was really hard.
This is also a woman who comes over from Turkey, a sort of extended family model.
Exactly.
She's coming over.
Right.
Yeah, she sounds like an amazing person herself, by the way.
She is, but you know, so having, I mean, if you can somehow either take advantage of your extended family or find a grandmother or a grandfather who, you know, would be willing to pitch in, and there are elderly in the communities that actually would love that. I think we as young parents overlook the elderly as a resource. You know, they're at home, they're retired. Watching a kid for 1 day a week, that would be such joy in their lives. So you've got to be creative, but balance and personal life, are you kidding? If I took a shower, that was an accomplishment.
Well, I think your story about, Steve, the second time that you did not go to Apple was partly a family. It was your decision, but it was a family balance decision, as I remember it.
Right. I know, 100% my decision and 100% based on the fact that I knew if I worked for Steve, there'd be no weekends, there'd be no nights. I mean, he's a phenomenal guy, very engaging, but you know, I would have no life, and I had 2 kids. So it wasn't right for me, and he couldn't believe that I turned him down. And but you know, it wasn't right for me.
So that's on that very bold note. I think she has some comments in the book like child rearing is not a gendered responsibility. Hence, the morning is one, the evening's the other. You basically also talk about the importance of family leave policies as opposed to maternity leave policies, things that we could do in the policy environment. And then sometimes there just isn't. So that story about Steve Jobs, which is just a compelling story, and when I was in government, I was working for Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a very engaging person to work for, the way Steve Jobs was. And at the end of 4 years, when I had the opportunity to stay for another 4, my husband and son said, "We're finished with this job. We don't know about you, but since we have it as well, we're finished. We would like to go back to California." It's a little bit like that. You just, at a certain point, the balance is you just have to make a choice, actually. There isn't any.
Exactly. I guess the word isn't so much balance. The word is one versus the other.
Right.
And sometimes, I mean, I say to a lot of young women, don't quit.
Right.
Just take another job that's not going to be as demanding for those years.
For those years,
that you basically have childcare taking a lot of your bandwidth. But if you quit, it might be very hard to come back.
It's
not
very
always. I mean, you know, a lot of women come back, and I talk about that in the book.
Right.
But if you can, you don't have to always be climbing as fast as, you know, your career is a long marathon. It doesn't have to be moving at the same level of acceleration at all times. I just want to say that no one asked me the really hard question tonight, and that is, why did I choose Stanford over Berkeley? I was expecting that.
Would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start, it'll be very brief. I want to start by saying, how did I choose Illinois Institute of Technology?
I thought it was a book in a library you chose it from.
Exactly. Well, I had first chosen, there were 2 schools I knew, okay? California Institute of Technology and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So I told the SAT organization to send my scores to those 2. And then they wrote back to me and they said, for no additional fee, we can send it to a 3rd school because 3 schools are free. I'm like, 3rd school, I'd have no idea. So I went back to the book and I was thumbing through and I found Illinois Institute of Technology, and it was by a lake. It was a big body of water, and I love water. I'm like, this is it for me. So I had them send my scores to Illinois Institute of Technology, and IIT accepted me just on my SAT scores. And I'm like, wow, they really like me. And I accepted them. I'm like, I'm coming. And because they accepted me first. And then I got my acceptance from MIT. Caltech turned me down. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm going to Illinois Institute of Technology.
They like me better.
They like me. They said yes. So then I applied to, then it got cold. It got really cold. And the only people who were complaining about the cold were these 2 guys. And I'm like, are there any good schools for where you're from? Because obviously you're cold like I'm cold. And they said they're from California. It turns out they were from Northern California. They said there were 2 good schools, Stanford and Berkeley. I'm like, great. I will transfer there because that sounds like it's better there. So I applied to transfer to Stanford and Berkeley. And Stanford accepted me first. So I'm like, great, I'm coming there. So,
you got to be quick with her, okay? You can't. That's it.
So that's how I ended up at Stanford. I had no idea there were palm trees. I had no idea. I asked the guys who were driving in, I'm like, when are we going to get to my school? And we're on Palm Drive, and he says, we're here. We're at your school. I'm like, this is my school? Anyway. It was a good beginning.
Well, I think you actually said somewhere in the book that you were either going to write on the essay. Yes, you were going to write on the essay that the reason you wanted to transfer was because of the weather. And someone suggested that was not a good application.
My roommate, so it was the last night, okay? And I didn't type, so no computers. So I was handwritten these 2 essays, and she says, well, let me read it. And I'm like, great. My roommate takes it, and she reads it, and she says, this is, why do you want to come to our school? Why do you think our school is a good choice for you? In both essays, I said, because your schools are in warm places, and I'm in Chicago, and I'm really cold here, and I want to go to school somewhere warm. And she's like, this is pathetic. It's like, you can't send this. This is horrible. I'm like, I'm sending it. Tonight is the night. I'm not going to write another essay. Are you kidding? It's going. And two people at Stanford and Berkeley must have felt really sorry for this girl. It was like freezing in Chicago.
Frankly, it was her grades and her SAT scores that did this, okay? They thought, all right, well, she might not know too much about applying to school, but this is one smart woman. So, all right, I'm going to end with just the notion that Magdalena says in her book that she has a no regrets strategy to life. I have a no regrets to having her be the first speaker at AmpEquity. This has been absolutely wonderful for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's really, really a great book, okay?
And a purse comes with it.
I haven't gotten the purse yet. I'm going to get the purse. Okay, I don't have the purse.
That's a birthday present.
All right.
Thank you so very much.
So much